44% of the vote. That's a strong first.
Rabbi, Rabbi, Yeah, Gary. Yeah. Okay, so you could see it as a restriction. You could also see it as an opportunity, right? It could be the opposite. That instead of if someone said to me, I'm trying to use a work example. Rebecca, I'll just use an example of Mincha Mariv. Rebecca, you never have to do Mincha Mariv for an entire year. You are off the hook for Mincha Mariv. Your interns will do Mincha Mariv for an entire year. If I'm a responsible rabbi and human, I wouldn't say, oh, great, I never have to come to Beth Am on a Shabbat afternoon ever again. I would reframe that to think I would help make the minyan. I could do something else off campus with families for Shabbat afternoon, right? There's lots of different ways of seeing this as maybe a restriction because you're being told to stop something, but you're also then being opened up to all these other possibilities that you might not even think about because you're too busy doing something else, right? Not to put Tom on the spot, but when you're writing a book, right? When you stop writing that book, you're like, oh, wow, I might have 700 million other ideas for other books, right? Because now that book is out of me. I feel the same way when I write a sermon. That sermon's now out of me. The next time I look at this Parsha, I have many other things I could possibly say about this. What Sforno is doing is connecting that to God. It might be the case that someone who is working the field all the time doesn't have time to come to Daily Minyan, sees Mike's WhatsApp chats and says, I don't really have the time. But what this is saying is that by keeping you away from needing to do that work, right? Not saying that it's a burden for you to do it when it's allowed to do, when you're allowed to do it, but when you know that you don't have to do it, this is now a way for you to focus on your spiritual life, on a way of being able to connect closer to God as opposed to worrying about, in this case, his job, which is to be a farmer. Yeah, Tom. Beautiful. Great. Yeah. I love that. I love that. So what Tom just said is that the word avodah, which is being used here in Sforno's Hebrew for his commentary, it's like a play on that word, that it's also the work that we do with our hands, but so too, it's the work that we do for God, right? It's our spiritual connection. The avodat Hashem is that relationship that we have with God. We hear it all the time in connection to the temple, that maybe this is a way of playing with that word avodah, that you're going to stop doing this work so that you can do another type of work. I love that, Tom. Thank you. Sforno goes on to say, just as the weekly Shabbat is a day set aside for intensive service of God, so too the Shemitah year is to serve the same purpose, right? And actually here in the Hebrew, it continues that same play on words that Tom is speaking about, right? That if Shabbat is a way for us to know that we have to stop the avodah, which in the Torah we call melacha, but that we stop that avodah so that we can have spiritual service. So too with Shemitah, that you should stop the actual handiwork that you are doing, or in modern day, the livelihood that you are doing, the work that you're doing, potentially in an office or out in the world, that you would stop doing that so that you could have a different kind of work on your hands with God. Okay. Chizkuni, by the way, the bar mitzvah kid today referenced two different commentary sources. One was Chizkuni and one was the Lakute Maharan. And when I work with kids, it's always just so cute to hear them then stand up on the bima and say, and then the Lakute Maharan says, couldn't answer 5 questions on who the Lakute Maharan is, but it was very cute to hear him say. Okay, so Chizkuni. So Chizkuni says, Shabbat Ladonai, on this same verse, the legislation is not because the land is tired after producing crops for 6 years in a row, but the Shabbat of the land is to remind you that the land belongs to God, though you are its tenants. So sometimes we take a break from something, not because we're tired of it, and not because it's a burden to us, but because sometimes you got to leave something alone to come back to it and have renewed understanding of it, a renewed way of seeing how you might affect the work that you're doing. That if you step away from something and then you come back to it, you have a sense that it's something that is much more important because you've left it alone. Or yeah, sort of, yeah. 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 Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Right. I think it's an interesting point that Irv's making about that COVID was a certain kind of Shemitah. And I think a lot of people feel that way in terms of a renewed sense of what am I doing? What's the importance of what am I doing? How can what I'm doing affect people who aren't just in my midst, but beyond, right? Right now, I have microphones in front of my face, not for all of you, but because there are people watching this who are not potentially even in Los Angeles, right? So the way in which we understood looking into the things that we do regularly and changing them, sometimes for the better. And I'd also say that I think that for COVID, there was a certain kind of challenge also that came with doing what you do all the time in a different space, right? For some people that meant their homes, other people that meant not having a job because their jobs were taken from them, and for other people that meant going into a hospital in a very different way that felt very dangerous. So it was a change, right, for everybody in some kind of way, and hopefully that allowed people to see a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. Okay, let's go to the next verse. You can read the Kliya Kar if you'd like, but we're going to go to the next verse. So the Leviticus 25:3 says, "Shesh shanim tizra sadecha v'shesh shanim tizmor karmecha." I love that it rhymes. That 6 years you're going to sow your field, and 6 years you can prune your vineyard. Ve'asafta et tivuata, and in that time you're going to gather its yield. Right? You can be a farmer. You can be a person who has crops. This, by the way, is still the way in which Israel practices Shemitah. I was there 2014 to 2015, so they had another one 2021, 2022. So this is the same way that Shemitah is still practiced in the land of Israel. That if you have fruit trees, or if you have, big pieces of land in Israel, you, the Jewish person who owns them, are not supposed to gather crops during the Shemitah year, but every other moment of the 6 years beforehand, you can do so. Seems like pshita, seems like the simple way of understanding this. But then, uvashana hashvi'it Shabbat Shabbaton ihiyeh la'aretz, Shabbat ladonai sadecha lo tizra v'charmecha lo tizmor. So in the 7th year, the land should have a Shabbat. We've already talked about that. A Shabbat to God. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. So as soon as this 7th year comes about, that stops. You stop taking care of your crops, and you start to focus in, as Tom was beautifully sharing and others, that you turn yourself towards God, towards other things that might be valuable for you in your life. What's the issue with this? Like the practical issue. Yeah, where do you go? All the hands. I say practical, and now you all have thoughts. Great. Where do you get your food, Mike? Yeah. Great. Exactly. So they're going to continue to produce fruit. What happens to it? Does it rot? That doesn't seem to be the right answer to it, because we don't want food to go to waste. So what happens to the fruit? There were a lot of other hands over here. Alan? Great. Great. Yeah, does something happen to the trees in that if we don't actually use the tree for what it is created for, does something then happen to the tree that's going to stop it from being able to produce that fruit or produce in the future? Yes, though you are allowed to milk cows during Shemitah. But yes, the way in which I read this and thinking about sabbaticals for human beings, or even Shabbat that we do every week, is sometimes, I had this experience today during shul, sometimes an idea pops into your head or something really important needs to be told to someone. And if you keep Shabbat, you worry, how am I going to remember that for 25 hours? Right? How am I going to go about my day? And part of Shemitah is saying, you know what? If I don't, it probably wasn't that important. Or it gives you time. Has anyone ever been mad at someone and wanted to write a really nasty email and then just given yourselves like a half a day? That email becomes much nicer, right? Because you just let it go a little bit. And that's the same that's happening with this Shemitah, is that we recognize, no pun intended, the fruits of your labor for 6 years. And then you think, you know what? There are other people who can pick this fruit. There are other people who can gain sustenance from this fruit. I will find my sustenance elsewhere. It'll be fine. In the Torah, God says, I will provide. In modern day, we know that there are other ways for us to get produce, right? And God is still providing, but meaning God isn't going to hand you a basket of fruit every week. But there's a real value in saying, you know what? I'm not going to be there, or I'm not able to take care of this right now, and it probably will all be fine, or it'll be taken care of by someone else, or it wasn't that important. So I think that's a way to also understand this 6 and then the 7. Turn the page. I thought this was hysterical, so I added it. Sforno says a Shabbat Ladonai is to seek out God in some manner and not to use the year to play golf. I think we could unpack with Sforno what he might mean by that, or, does he need to play some more golf in his own life? There's, in a pastoral meeting with Sforno, I would have some questions about him using this as an example, but what he's getting at here is that it shouldn't just be a year. And by the way, this is how sabbaticals at Beth Am, and I'm sure other places work. You can't just take 3 months off. You're not just out in the world going to a spa and sunbathing every day. While you're not working here, you're working on yourself and on your craft in other ways. So when you take a sabbatical, you are able to enrich yourself, and hopefully, in the case of Beth Am, your life as a clergy member by enhancing something that you don't have time normally to focus on. Rabbi Klickfeld, that's where y'all got meditation from. He went on sabbatical and came back, and now you all meditate. So that is something that, before Rabbi Klickfeld went on a sabbatical, he knew that he had the interest. I'm not saying anything that he wouldn't share with you. He knew that he had the interest, but didn't have the time to go on retreats and to be able to figure out how to do that in a practical, but also in a professional way. And so he came back with that gift for the community. I don't know what that will look like for Cantor Tony. I know what it looked like for Cheryl. But the community should feel as though, I just don't know what it will look like, but no one does, because that's in 3 months. But the way in which someone is supposed to go on sabbatical is to enrich the community in some way that we can't even imagine what that might be if they're still in their office 24/7, 24/6. Oh, sorry, what? Yeah, sometimes that's important, right? Like when people take leave for mental health reasons, that's also important, right? Thank goodness. I don't think that's why Talmud Beth Am is sending us on sabbaticals, but I think that is a very important part of people taking a break in general. And I would say it's one of the values of Shabbat. If people really keep Shabbat, I actually think it does help mental health in terms of just not seeing what's going on in the world all the time. And not being engaged in things that can harm us. Okay, let's keep going in these verses for a little bit. So the next 3 verses are still going to talk about the land. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your vineyard, untrimmed, vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. So don't even think that if your vine produces more grapes than it normally does, that you can gather those grapes. No, you can't gather anything. You have to let it just be. You can't gather anything that is coming onto your produce, trees, bushes, stalks. You have to make sure that nothing is touched. You may eat whatever the land during this Shemitah, during this Shabbat, will produce. You, your slaves, the hired and bound laborers who live with you, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield. Now, that doesn't mean the year of Shemitah, that means the year after, right? And again, if people are interested in this, I'm happy to share with you the halachic parameters for how this happens, even today in the land of Israel. But the way in which I think God is trying to get us to understand Shemitah here is that it's not just a dismissal, it's an allowance for the land to hopefully actually get better and be more relaxed, and therefore do a better job of producing produce the following year. But the following year, you're able to eat of the produce that it produced during that Shemitah year. Now, I will just say, having lived in Israel, the year after a Shemitah, the produce is not good. I mean, it's fine, but it's not as abundant, right? We go to Trader Joe's any month of the year and you can get any kind of produce because it's being brought in from all different kinds of places. If you go to a farmer's market in February, it's going to be different than the farmer's market in May, right? Because that's coming from this land. That's coming from the land that you are going to the farmer's market in, so Los Angeles, right, or its surrounding areas. In Israel, Israel is not, there are some places that Israel brings produce in from, and because it's like $75 for an avocado. But for the most part, the food that you are eating, the produce that you are eating, especially if you buy it from the shuk, is from the land of Israel and its surrounding areas, right? And so then the year after a Shemitah, you're not going to see as much of certain things based off of what was able to be gathered. During the Shemitah year, there's rules and regulations to how that food can come to be, but it's more expensive. And you see the difference, but then 2 years later, it's all back to normal. So the people living on the land of Israel do feel this still till today. This is not an ancient practice that we don't know anything about anymore. This is still very much happening. Many verses later, I guess not many, but verses later, you shall observe my laws and faithfully keep my rules, that you may live upon the land in security. So now there's a whole other reason for this, and it's so that you should live on this land with a feeling of safety. Now, what would that have anything to do with Shemitah? Or if you want to connect it to a human's type sabbatical, what would this have to do with it? Esther, sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm not sure that's what it's saying here, but you are correct that if it's someone's livelihood to have land, then if they're selling that food and that produce, then yes, that is what they get sustenance from. Very good, both literally and figuratively. What is this verse talking about in terms of living on the land in security? And again, if you want to connect it to a human's Shemitah, a human's sabbatical, you totally can. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. That if you do what I'm telling you to do, that you're gonna be safe. Right. That God is just kind of saying like, okay, or if, right? Or else, I guess it's not or if. Or else if you go against what I'm saying, then you won't be safe. Sure. Yeah, release. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay. So if a person needs to take a break so that they can kind of figure out their own lives to be in a healthy space to be able to continue to do that work, then they have, I'll put words in your mouth, like job security, right? They can continue to do that work that they were doing before. The way that I read this is that if you recognize, and for some people this is hard, I am one of these people. If you recognize that sometimes stopping and just letting things go. I don't mean like you're mad at someone and letting that go. I mean like not writing that email because someone else can, is what I mean by letting it go. If you can just stop and take a break, you might actually have more security in your own future for whatever you're working on than if you work yourself to the bone and then you get burnt out and you're like, I gotta be done here. And I think that's partially what's happening with a Shemitah. If you continue to pick strawberries for 45 years without taking a break from that work, you are going to be done. That's going to be enough for you, right? Because you can only do the same thing over and over again until you say, you know what? I got to figure out if there's other things that I can be doing. And I think that what God is basically saying is God is making this an ultimatum in certain ways, that if you don't do this, there won't be security for you, because you won't feel as though you have that connection any longer to a place where you were once extremely excited and very eager to be creative and really wanting to move mountains to make things happen. You're now just kind of coasting. So take a break and come back and see if there's a way that you can move mountains again. Okay? So that's obviously just my take. That doesn't say that in the Torah anywhere. Okay, go to the next verse, not the next commentary, the next verse. The land shall yield its fruit, and you shall eat your fill, and you shall live upon it in security. So that's a repetition of what we heard before. Rashi says, even if you eat only a little, it will be blessed in your stomach. Right? Even if you only appreciate this a tiny bit, and I actually think that's what Shabbat is. But Shabbat isn't actually that big of a rest. It's just 25 hours. And there are always things in which we are doing that are not complete rest, right? Even if you keep Shabbat, even if you are not a clergy person, there are still things that you are doing on Shabbat that feel like work in a certain sense. Maybe it's taking a long walk to get to shul. Maybe it's hosting a meal, right? Not everything is 125% easy. It should be joyful. But even Shabbat has elements of feeling as though there's a little bit of work happening here, even if it's, quote, okay work to be doing. But what Rashi's saying is that if you can even enjoy just a little bit of it, that's going to bring you blessing, literally inside you. It's going to bring blessing inside of you, because you're going to be able to appreciate it in a different way than you would have had you just seen it as the normal way of life. I want us to look at this last commentary. I wouldn't have made this 3 pages if I didn't think this commentary was meaningful. This is the Or HaChaim on that last verse, and he says, "And the earth shall yield her fruit." Right. So first of all, he's focusing on a part here that already lends itself to a beautiful, story, metaphor, right, illustration. That if you think about it, the land should still be allowed to produce what she produces, right? Just like a human should still be allowed to feel creative and be able to produce things that are meaningful to them. And yet, there should also be a sense of almost boundlessness, right? Being able to do that without people stopping you or without having other restrictions in that kind of creativity. The meaning of her fruit, the Or HaChaim says, is that which corresponds to the potential it has been endowed with. So not necessarily the oranges that are there, but all the oranges that could be there. When we observe the earth producing fruit, this does not prove that the amount of fruit we observe the earth to produce is equivalent to the amount the earth is capable of producing. We find in Ketubot, in the Gemara, that a certain sage was angry at the earth and decreed that it be prevented from yielding its fruit. As a result of this curse, the earth produced far less than previous. If someone had not seen the amount of fruit that piece of earth produced before the sage cursed it, he would have thought that amount it produced subsequently was the maximum it was capable of producing. People have thoughts about this? Comments before I share mine? Yeah, Gary. Yeah. Yeah, Yeah, right. So sometimes just what you know that it had the capability to produce because you'd seen it produce in the past, but the fact that it didn't produce this year allowed you to know, hopefully, it'll produce better the next year, or that that it needs now something to help it produce, right? To help it do better next time. Yeah, Tom. Yeah. 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 Right, exactly. And I think what Tom just said is exactly where my mind went when I read this. And I think that the idea there is that if a person then comes back from a sabbatical, again, if it's the kind of sabbatical that Ken Tortorni is about to take or Cheryl just took, or just coming back after not being in town for however many months, right? Some people go away to the East Coast and then come back in the fall. Hopefully they feel renewed in what they're experiencing because they've had time to think about, produce, create elsewhere, or just in a different vein, and then to come back to whether it's family, community, etc., and do so in a new way. And yet people might not know, right, that you were capable of that before, or that you were thinking, wow, I wish I had more time to do that before, and now you're actually able to show that, and in this case to a community, or to whoever is benefiting from that, potentially even just yourself. Alan, last word. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. 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 Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I'll tell I'll tell you exactly how. The rabbis wrote a story so that you know not to do this, and therefore is blaming a rabbi for having done it. But all joking aside, for sure this is not a true story, right? And yet it's getting the point across that even if Gary had moved onto his lot, and on this year, when his apricot tree did not produce, he would assume it's a tree that doesn't produce fruit. But because he's lived there and knows that it can, he gives it a chance to be able to do that again in coming years. So I think what the rabbis are trying to get at here by creating a fictitious story is that we need to recognize that even when we might see something in front of us and think that is not possible, or that's not something that I'm capable of doing, that once you have a different mindset or approach or just time to be able to do so, you might be able to create that, and you didn't even know that it was something that could be created because you never had the possibility for it. So don't get too angry, it's a made up story. Aviva. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. There you go. So I hope that what you're able to gain from this is to think about ways in which you are not only capable of, but actually responsible for taking sabbaticals in your own life. whether that means from the work that you do or a situation that you are in, or just putting something aside that you've been doing for a long time and need a break from, that we are each of us in need, just like our trees, to take some time off to be able to produce different and better and hopefully bigger fruits for the life that we live. That is part of these cycles that Aviva is talking about, that we need to be able to let go and then come back. And that I think that we are all capable of growing really beautiful fruits for our community and for our own selves, and that we need that time to rest before we can see how much that brings to the rest of the world. So Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for yeah. No, no. I mean, organic produce is a whole different arena. Um, this is not talking about the way in which fruit or vegetables are um, cultivated. It's just talking about not actually being in the process of picking them, of gathering them for a specific amount of time, so that they can just do their own thing for a year and then hopefully get better for the following season. Right, that's before the first harvest, right? Of the fruit. Yeah. So I think that's just I think that's just a gardening practice, but this is every 7 years on rotation. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great question. Okay, Birkana Mazon, very quickly on page 42. Or in the newer book, 47. Okay, or 47. And then we will do more. Yasher koach to Joey for leading us in Birkat Hamazon. We'll turn now to Mariv, which is on page 264 in the Lev Shalem. If you're able to do so, please rise. Vehu rachum yachaper avam velo yashchit vehir shiva pavaler kol chamato Adonai Hoshia hamelech ya'anenu veyom korenu baruchu et Adonai hamvorach Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed Baruch Adonai melech haolam asher Uma avir yom umevi laila mavdil ben yom uvein laila Adonai tzvaot shemo el chai v'kayam tamidim l'cholenu le'olam va'ed Baruch ata Adonai hamari v'aravim ahavat olam b'et Yisrael v'cha'avta Torah mitzvot ve'ahavatecha tasir mimenu le'olamim Baruch ata Adonai ohev amo Yisrael Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Adonai lechem emet v'nakol zakayim Umachuto beratzon kiblu alehem Moshe v'nei Yisrael lechanu shira b'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam Micha mocha balim Adonai Mika mocha nedar b'kodesh Norati lo tosef ele Machutecha ra'u v'anecha bokeh yam lifnei Moshe zeili anu v'yamru Adonai himlach le'olam va'ed v'ne'emar kifat Adonai et Yaakov u'golam yad chazak mimenu Baruch ata Adonai ga'al Yisrael Hashkivenu Adonai v'enu shalom v'enu Ushemor tzeitenu voinu l'chaim u'shalom et ave adolam Baruch ata Adonai shomer amo Yisrael la'ad Baruch Adonai olam amen v'amen Baruch Adonai mesem shchem shalom Ki ha-malchut shelecha hi u'le'yom le'atimlach b'chavod ki lanu melech alei ata Baruch ata Adonai ha-melech b'chvado tamidim l'chaleinu le'olam va'ed v'al kol ma'asav Yitkadav yitkadav shemei rabba Ve'hamad yivrak yirtei v'emlich malchutei b'chayechonu v'yomechonu v'chayedecho beit Yisrael v'agalav izman kariv v'imru amen Yehi shmei rabba v'rach le'olam l'me'amaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramah v'yinaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalav shmei d'kudesha b'richu Le'elam min kol b'chata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imruhu amen. The whispered Amidah is on page 270. If you have not yet finished your Amidah, please continue at your own pace. Chatzi Kaddish on page 279. Yitkada v'ikada shemei rabba v'hama divra kirtei v'mlich malchutei v'chayechanu yom echad v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kariv v'imru amen Yehi shmei rabba v'rach le'olam lamei amaya Yitbarach v'yishabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'naseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalosh midikudesha b'richu le'elam min kol b'chata v'shirata tishbechata v'nechemata damiran v'elma v'imru amen V'hino manana l'hino l'hino ma'asayadinu kodana l'hino ma'asayadinu kodanehu yishav b'sadalad b'sashadai v'lanu Yikraini v'neu imonochi v'tzarach chaltzeu v'echvadeu v'orechem im asvi'ehu v'reu b'shuhati orechem im asvi'ehu v'reu b'shuhati Page 216 ואתה קדוש ישבתי לא תשרוף וקרא זה זה ואמר קדוש 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 אמת ומלך על הארץ כבודו ותישאני רוח ואשמע אחרי קורש גדול ברוך אדוני ממקומו ויבטחו בך יודעי שמך כי לא עזבת דרכך אדוני אדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה ויגדיר Page 280 יתקדע ויקדש שמי רבה והמה דברה קרתי ומליך מלכותי וחייכנו יום אחד וחיי לכל בית ישראל ועגלה בזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה וברך לעולם למאמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם וינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלוש מדקודשה בריחו לעילם מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דאמירנה בעלמא ואמרו אמן תתקבל צלו דהון ודהון דכל ישראל קודמה והון דבי שמיה ואמרו אמן יהי שלום הרב שמיה וחיים עלינו וכל ישראל ואמרו אמן עושה שלום ממרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל לתת גדול לצבא שלו ואנחנו כהנים משחווים ומודים למלך ולמלך הקדוש הקדוש ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Mourner's Kaddish, and this is a good moment to just remind everyone that there are 2 deaths in the family this week. Rachel Reuben Green's brother and Ron Albert's mother, and so there will be 2 Shiva Minyanim. Ron's mother's Shiva starts tomorrow morning, and Shiva for Rachel's brother will begin Monday night. There's also daily minyan. So that's 3 minyanim happening in this community. So please, lovely to have you all tonight, and thank you for helping us make a minyan here. And throughout the week, just be trying to go somewhere to help us make a minyan, so that especially so that the mourners can be able to say Kaddish in all of those 3 spaces. Mourners Kaddish, page 282. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabba be'alma divra kirutei ve'amlich malchutei בחייכון ויומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מברך יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. All right, we will do Havdalah and then do the counting for the Omer. I'm going to open that up really quickly. That'll be on page 63 if anybody wants to be ready for the Omer. Yanai, nanai, nai, yanai. Yanai, nanai, nai, nai, nai. Yanai, nanai, nai, 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 nai. Yanai, yanai, 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 nai, nai, nai. Hine el Yeshuati, Eftach velo efchad, Ki ozi v'zimratya, Adonai payehi li Yeshua, Shavte mayim besasod, Mimayne ha-Yeshua, L'Adonai ha-Yeshua, Alamcha v'irchatecha sela, Adonai tzevaot, Imanu, Miskav lanu, Elohei Yaakov Selah, Adonai Tzevaot, Ashrei Adam Boteach, Adonai Hoshia, HaMelech Yaneinu V'Yom Koreinu LaYehudim, Hayta Ora, Vesimcha Vesason Veikar, Ken Tieh Lanu, Kos Yeshua Tesa, Uveshem Adonai Ekra, Yainanai, Yananai, Nainam, Yainana, Yananai, Nainai, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu Melech Haolam, Borei Peri Hagafen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu Melech Haolam, Borei Minei Vesamim. Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu Melech Haolam, Borei Mirei Ha'esh. Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu Melech Haolam, Hamavdil ben Kodesh lechol, ben Or lechoshech, ben Yisrael le'amim, ben Yom HaShvi'i le'sheshet Yamei HaMaseh. Baruch Atah Adonai, Hamavdil ben Kodesh lechol. Hamavdil ben Kodesh lechol. Chatoteinu imcho. Zareinu v'chasben, yarbe yarbe kacho, v'kaha kochavim balayla. Zareinu v'chasben, yarbe yarbe kacho, v'kaha kochavim balayla. Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Agiladi, Bimera ve'yameinu, Yavo Eleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David. Page 63. Hineni muchanum zuman, Hineni muchanum zuman, Hineni muchanum zuman, Lekayem mitzvat aseh shel svirat haomer. Hineni muchanum zuman, kamo shekatuv batorah. Hineni muchanum zuman, usvartam lachem mimacharat haShabbat. Hineni muchanum zuman, miyom aviyachem et omer hatnufa. Hineni muchanum zuman. Sheva Shabbatot miyotiyena mimacharat Shabbat hashviti Baruch hamishim yom. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav vetzivanu al tzvirat haomer. Yesterday was the 25th day, so do the math. Hayom shisha ve'esrim yom shehem shlosha shavuot v'chamisha yamim la'omer. Today is the 26th day, 3 weeks and 5 days of the Omer, and the 227th, 26th day of our hostages being in Gaza. Shavua Tov, everyone. Tomorrow morning, Minyan is at 8 a.m. The Minyanim are in your email for Shiva, and hope to see you throughout the week. Have a great week. You're welcome.